there's kind of this subtle literary pattern that you highlight that I think is really interesting, where Esther, who's kind of this as good as dead crisis turning, around precisely on the third day. And so just thinking about, this language of, kind of third day throughout the Old Testament, where else does this pattern kind of crop up, and how does it prepare us for, Christ's resurrection?
Yeah, well, just, again, Stephen G. Dempster has an article, Westminster Theological Journal, raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And so a lot of my work is taking like super like more scholarly stuff and saying, okay, let's show how accessible this is, and
Yeah.
let's glean it for another, crowd. And so we don't need to read Layla Lee Bronner's monograph. Let's glean from it, and, people that
Hmm.
might not read that. And same with this, but Dempster makes the point that you've got this third day motif throughout the scriptures. And when you start looking for it, sometimes that word third day, it's just kind of there. It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah.
But at other times, it seems like an intentional motif that you can trace that's leading us to expect a third day resurrection that's to come.
Hmm.
And, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says that Christ died according to the scripture. These are matters of first importance. Here's central stuff.
Yeah.
Christ died according to the scriptures. He was buried, and he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And then he was proclaimed, or he appeared, sorry, those 4 words.
Hmm.
But the died is according to the scriptures, and raised on the third day is according to the scriptures. So for us as readers of the Bible, we need to ask the question, where in the Old Testament does it anticipate that Jesus would be raised specifically on the third day? So we go looking for instances, and we find, for example, Genesis 22, Abraham and Isaac, God tests Abraham, go and sacrifice your son on one of the mountains I will show you. And in that moment, when Abraham took Isaac and his 2 servant boys and started walking, Isaac was as good as dead.
Yeah.
Because he had decided, I'm going to kill him. And so they're walking. Isaac doesn't know it, but they're walking to kill Isaac. And then it seems like a throwaway line that no one would mention in their sermon. But it says, on the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from a distance, from afar. What does that mean? That means that when they dropped off the 2 servant boys, they saw the place from a distance. That all happened on the third day.
Yeah.
And so it was the third day that Isaac was bound. It was the third day that Isaac was laid on the altar. It was the third day that Abraham took the knife like this. And it was the third day that the angel of Yahweh stopped him and showed him a ram caught in a thicket by its horns.
Yeah.
And so if Isaac was as good as dead when Abraham received the command, it was on the third day that Abraham received Isaac back from the dead. And what does the author of Hebrews in Hebrews 11, the great hall of faith, tell us? In a way, he did receive him back from the dead.
Yeah.
Because he was good as dead.
That's right.
And so that leads us, those 2 New Testament cues, 1 Corinthians 15, 3 and I think it's 3 to 5, and then Hebrews 11 and the Abraham Isaac story, and going back there, tell us, okay, look for third day. And then you got sign of Jonah, third day. He was, and that's affirmed by Jesus. But then you start to see a third day motif, and you get to the book of Esther. And although the name God is never mentioned, Esther's full of, and we don't have time to get into all of it, but there's an intentional, if you read this in light of the rest of the Old Testament, there's a lot of pop here. And so you got to read the book to get the pop. But we already talked, you already pointed us here, so we'll do this one. But when Esther needs to go in and talk to the king and plead for the Jews, she knows that if she's going to go, that if she is unsummoned and goes into his presence, she will die unless he extends the golden scepter and she touches it, and then she's lived. And she decides in that moment, I'm going to go into his presence. Esther's as good as dead.
Yeah.
And she calls for a 3-day fast. And then after it's third day, she goes into his presence. He extends the scepter, she touches it, and she's given her life back. And that's, Esther's given. She's one of the third day resurrection motifs in the Old Testament. And Dempster makes the point that if we're going fishing and we cast out our net and we're not catching any fish, maybe it's because our net, the holes in our net are this big. And maybe the problem's with our net, not the fish. And
Yeah.
maybe if we're looking for third day resurrection motif in the Old Testament, maybe the problem's with our Western conception of what resurrection is
Hmm.
rather than the Old Testament. And if we let the Bible itself kind of unfold its own story for us, and if we enter into the thought, the way the Hebrew mind thought, we see this as actually a motif that's repeated in the Old
Hmm.
Testament. And you mentioned Jim Hamilton. I emailed him about this and I said, am I nuts for thinking this? And he agreed with me. He said she's a part of that third day resurrection motif in the Old Testament. She's that typological pattern
Yeah.
is clearly there in the text.
Hmm.
And God honors this faithful woman, flawed but faithful woman, to be a type of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. So